Hi, I'm Anna.
And I'm Kent.
And this is Film and Family, a podcast for filmmakers and professionals in the entertainment industry who want to find greater joy and satisfaction in both their film career and family life.
Let's jump right in.
Today, we want to talk about time and order. And just starting out, I think a lot of people feel a lot of stress about timelines when they think about their birthdays coming up, when they think about how old they are, how old other people are, what their success looks like, what other people's success looks like. And this is something that I've heard referred to as success expectancy. It's kind of your picture in your mind of what you think success is going to look like. And that picture can not always be accurate and sometimes actually make things take longer. So, if you're looking at other people around you and thinking that what you're doing isn't working, then that's going to slow you down. You start to slow down and you start to not work. And so I guess that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. I mean, it's a common thought, right? We've ran into that in our own lives. We've seen other people in our, of our peers in film and in anything really. They play this game. I think a lot of us do this where we say, okay, well, so-and-so won an Oscar at age whatever, or they made their big break at this age, or, I don't know. I think a lot of us do that.
Why is it taking so long? If you feel impatient, this episode is for you.
Yes. If you're wondering why you haven't exploded and become the darling of whatever it is you do. And so, we've been talking a lot about that this week, and we have talked about time.
Yes, and the fact that time is just a mental construct, like we just created this perception of time in our heads. It's not really a real thing. So, what if we didn't believe in time?
Well, I think then you'd have a lot of mathmaticians get really angry at you, like Albert Einstein. Well, he wasn't much of a mathematician.
Actually,
but theoretical physicists would also get really frustrated with you. But
wasn't it Einstein who talked about bending time?
Time is relative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't think he would get mad at me.
I guess he wouldn't be able to accept the idea that it's not real, but he would accept that it's relative, which is interesting. But for the sake of this podcast, we want to change our thought structure around time. And not that time doesn't exist. Maybe it's fine to set that aside, but that certainly shouldn't be our focus. How old are we? How fast did we accomplish something? How young were we? By what age do we want to make our first million? I feel like that's a conversation a lot of people have. People that want to make millions.
So we read the scripture that says that God doesn't measure time, that time is only measured unto men. And so we had this conversation of okay, well, if time isn't measured by God, but yet he does sometimes talk about things within a timeline. He'll say, first this happens and then this will happen. And, we'll see these signs before this thing happens. And so we realize that God doesn't reference time as this exact date at this exact time as much as he does talk about order. This happens first and this happens next. And after that, you'll see something else.
And even when he says something's going to happen soon or quickly, you can expect to wait a minimum of a few decades, if not a few centuries. And so
I guess the Bible does say he created the earth in 7 days, but even that,
I guess 6 days, but even that is relative. Anyway,
it's a day to God is 1,000 years or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
So anyway, so the point of why this is so sort of damning to our careers, it really doesn't help us progress or move forward at all, is because comparison is crippling. It's really what we're doing. We're comparing ourselves to other people. We're trying to base our value off of, if I can accomplish such and such a goal by age whatever, then that will be success. And if I don't, that'll be failure.
And this idea that success is being better in some way.
Yeah, then I'll be good enough or better than or whatever. We're playing this comparison game. And then what we end up inevitably doing is we're always going to find someone who beats us. Like, there's only one person who has the world record for the youngest person to do whatever thing it is that you're thinking of. And so, I mean, unless you do that in every aspect that matters to you in your life, which is astonishing. But
and I think a lot of
us, to counter that, some things you don't want to do fast. Like, no one talks about teen pregnancies. They're like this great accomplishment. Like, yeah, you did it. you were the first.
So young.
You were the first. You were the youngest. That's where order comes in, right? There are certain things we want to do in a certain order, and we want to try and figure out maybe focusing less on how fast do I want to accomplish everything and more on what is the correct order in which I want to accomplish things, and when does order really matter?
Yeah, and I also think it's good to know what you measure success by, because I think this is often a subconscious thing. It's not like we're consciously realizing that we're competing with everybody, but if we're always feeling like we fall short and we're not good enough, then maybe we have some sort of arbitrary measurement of success and what that looks like. And it might be helpful just to say, what does success actually look like for me? What am I actually trying to achieve?
Yeah. What kind of life do I want to accomplish? What do I want my life to look like? When
will I decide to let myself feel successful?
Yeah, that's a good one, actually, because I find that probably the most crucial time to let myself feel successful is right now. And that'll actually create more success in my life than not letting myself feel successful until I hit this next milestone, as if discontent will somehow help me progress faster, which for the most part, I don't think is actually very effective. It certainly isn't sustainable, because that's why people burn out, I think, is because they live in a constant state of discontent. And then they start to wonder why their dream careers, aren't fulfilling them and filling them with joy.
But I think everyone thinks this because we all do whatever we do because we want to feel a certain way. So if what you want to feel is successful in some way, then we think, oh, I have to change my circumstances. I have to change my situation, and then I'll feel successful, when in reality, it's the opposite. Like, you have to feel successful first, be the person who feels that way and acts that way first, and then the exterior circumstances will change.
Yeah. This is, that's a hard thing, I think. And hopefully this doesn't sound too much like hocus pocus, but it's real. It's real. I think when we can create something internally, emotionally first, then it can start to become a reality in our lives. Because we'll be thinking the thoughts that help us feel those feelings, and those thoughts will help us take the actions that will lead us to those results. Mm-hmm. And so I want to talk a little bit about climbing ladders. We always think of this idea of climbing a ladder in a certain career field. I think most of us in the film industry understand that doesn't exist. Most of us understand, I don't think it really exists in any job that you go into, or career or field or what industry, but especially in film, I think we all know that you can't go get, you don't go to film school. It's not the same as med school or law school, and then just come out so beautifully certified that you just sail right into a great job, or you just start a practice, and someone's always going to need a lawyer, someone's always going to need a doctor. But it's not like there's people every day whose part of their, normal lives is like, I just know at some point I'm just going to have to hire a filmmaker. Like, it's not like this thing where you can just get really accredited and then just charge exuberant amounts of money for an absolutely needed service. And so we all know that there's also not a clear path up to the top of a chain at a company that you usually take. I'm sure there's some exceptions to that, but for the most part, especially for writers, directors, actors, there's really nothing quite like that in terms of climbing that ladder. But if there is an order to things, there is a different ladder. It's not a ladder of positions or a ladder of job descriptions. It's more a ladder of courses or skills that you put yourself through. And this kind of touches on this idea that Clay Christensen talks about in his book, which we've mentioned before, How Will You Measure Your Life, is this idea of signing yourself up for courses. And he says that we should be seeking the challenging jobs or tasks or experiences in our lives that we know will prepare us to do the thing we ultimately want to do. And he gives the example of the person who became the youngest CEO. So we're talking about comparison again, right? He became the youngest CEO of a Fortune 500 company at the time. And instead of doing what most people do when they graduate from business school, but which is trying to rush into sort of that C-suite executive level job, he just said, what are the things I'm going to need to learn to become the CEO of the kind of company I want to run? And he went and took a job here and a job there, which he knew I'm going to need to know how to build something from the ground up. I'm going to need to know how to kind of turn something around. I'm going to need to know how to handle things within these industries. I'm going to need to familiarize myself with these things.
So he was selecting jobs based on the things he knew he needed to learn, not the ones that seemed the most prestigious or paid the most upfront, like some of his colleagues.
Yeah, not status. Yeah, and he was really hiring the job to give him experiences. And so he understood this, and ironically, he got to where he was wanting to go faster than, frankly, anyone else in history. And so that, I think, is interesting, that when we really focus on time, it's slower. But when we focus on order, it might actually be faster. But it won't matter how fast it is to us, because we'll be taking things in the correct order, no matter how long it takes.
Well, and I think it's so interesting, the common perceptions of time that we have that are different. For example, a lot of people will overestimate what they can do in the short term and underestimate what they can do in the long term.
That's a Brooke Castillo thought, right?
Yeah. And so that's something to think about when you're setting goals. She talks about setting a 10-year goal, and we often underestimate what we can do in 10 years. And then you break it down until you get like your 3-month goal and your 1-month goal, your 1-week goal. And then it becomes something much more manageable and doable. Whereas if you just said, what's my goal for the month? What's my goal for the year? You might give yourself a little more than you're capable of doing. And
especially the month. I feel like this week,
smaller increments.
This week, I'm going to book 16 clients. It's like, I'm just going to work really hard and I'm not going to sleep this week. We always do that. We want to cram. And, that's really pushed into our culture, this cramming idea.
And I think what takes longer, trying to jump to the top of a building over and over again and falling every single time, or stepping slowly up every single step of a ladder.
Yeah, taking the stairs or trying to climb or trying to jump.
And it seems like, if I could just jump right up there, I bet I could make it in one shot.
Well, even if it takes me 12 tries, it'd still be faster.
But in the end, really just taking all the necessary steps, moving forward at a slow pace, slow and steady wins the race. I really believe this. And something that's funny, we've got a 5-year-old son, and it was a little bit ago, probably when he was like 3 or 4. Whenever we were trying to hurry somewhere, we'd say, hurry, we gotta go, or whatever. And he would just go into this frenzy of activity that was not at all productive. Like, he would just run around in circles and go, ah! And like, just not get his shoes on, not get anything done.
I forgot about this.
Yeah. And so we started saying, Marshall, okay.
Hurrying is slower.
Yeah. Rushing takes longer. When you're rushing, because he said, I'm rushing. He said, rushing takes longer.
Especially when you're doing it.
I just thought that was a really funny way to learn that principle. But I realized it for myself too, that when I feel rushed, I drop things, I get nervous, I don't perform as well, and it slows me down.
Well, and you frenzy and grab at whatever thing there is to do in front of you. Sometimes when we don't have a good plan, we don't have a good vision for what we're doing, and we don't understand the purpose of each task, then I quickly find myself just obliterating to-do list items. But then I'm like, then you like find yourself in these like weird internet loops where you're like, check my email, check this website, check this thing, send this message to someone. And it's like, you're not actually getting anything done.
Like,
You're
I
not
got 10 things done.
Yeah, you're not creating anything, you know. It's like organize my desk, write a note to do something else, sit down and think, what am I going to do now? And then you come up with 3 things, and then you're like, it's just, you're doing what Marshall's doing. You're just like, you know, our 3 or 4 year olds
I'm
at the
moving.
time.
I'm not stopping.
I'm moving. I'm not stopping. I'm running around. And yeah. Anyway, that's a great example. Can I give one more example of someone who I think kind of understood this principle of order?
Yeah.
Damien Chazelle. Most of us know who that is if you're in the film industry at all. He is the director of a big movie called La La Land and another movie called First Man. But before those movies came a movie called Whiplash. And before Whiplash came a short film called Whiplash. And before that short film came many, many scripts, some of which he doesn't even take credit for because I think he just took them for the money. He needed a job. That happens in all of our lives. And he wrote a bunch of scripts. And before that, he got an agent that helped him get those paid jobs to write scripts. And before that, there was a little movie that most of us don't know about, which is called Guy and Madeline on a Park Bench. And before that, he was he was making money as a Harvard student. Yeah, he went to Harvard as a Harvard student writing other people's papers, which he talks about. I'm not like ratting him out. And so let's work backwards. Well, I guess forwards. I just worked backwards. And he talks about making this film in Boston when he's going to Harvard. Black and white, 16 millimeter. He shoots it himself. He's not really a DP, but he shoots it himself. Handheld 16 millimeter film camera. And it's this weird peck and paw cinema verite style musical. And there's a lot of charm to it. It's not like masterful by any means, but it was very creative. He released it before the digital revolution of cinema, so there were, I think, less films and festivals at the time. I think it went to Cannes or Tribeca or Venice or somewhere pretty prestigious as far as the festival run goes, and it didn't make a big splash. It wasn't like anything that's going to go down in history. Well, maybe it will now because he's gone down in history, but the film itself wasn't going to make a career for anybody. But it helped him meet an agent because he was showing his film around, and the agent kind of said, what do you have? And he had some stuff, I assume. He had some writing, and started writing scripts and getting jobs. And he did that for years. And then they found this little script called Whiplash that he'd written, and his agent encouraged him to actually push that one and try and make it. And after many, many scripts for hire, they kind of met some producers that were interested in making it, but even they were saying, we don't know if we actually want to give this. I mean, he's made a feature, but he's not made a feature of this caliber. And he wrote the script and it's great, but we're not sure if we get the genre. It's this horror film about a drummer in college who's playing the drums, and there's J.K. Simmons in it, you know? And it's like, what exactly is the tone of this film? I think they were trying to catch the vision, and they wanted to know that he could execute this sort of interesting genre film. And then so they said, make a short film. They made it for like, you know, less than like $25,000, I think. And they put this thing together, and it won Sundance. It definitely worked. So great proof of concept. And then they made the feature film. And then he makes La La Land, which was essentially a $30 million version of the black and white peck and paw musical that he made in the streets of Boston.
The one he wanted to make all along.
Yeah. And so if he had just sat around and said, I'm not going to make a movie until I make my passion project, until I make my magnum opus, you know, I'm going to wait for La La Land. That's the movie I'm going to make first. Then he'd sat around forever. But because he was willing to write the scripts and write and go to LA and meet the people, and he worked, and he was able to say, well, you know, he's getting the experiences he needed to, and he was showing his work. And this isn't going to happen to everyone who obeys all the correct principles, but in his case, he became the youngest person to win Best Director at the Oscars. And that's, I don't know, that's crazy. It's just another example of this idea of like, just focus on the order of things and what do you need to do next. Don't focus on how young do I want to be when I do the big thing that I'm eventually going to do. Just say, what am I going to do next? And the best way to determine what you're going to do next is to know the big goals. That's important. Mm-hmm. And work backwards from there and say, if I want to do this thing eventually, then what are the things I'm going to have to do before that? And you trace that back until you identify the next thing to do.
And you're not always going to know how. That's the exciting part about it. You don't know how. Like you could have a friend tell you the ending of a movie and say, "Oh, don't worry, he doesn't die at the end." But you can still watch the movie and enjoy the drama. You know he's not going to die at the end, but you might still all along the way wonder, how? How is he not going to die at the end? How's this going to work out? And enjoy the journey. And you can feel that way about your life. Like, I know how it's going to end. I know what my end goal is, and I'm just going to keep driving till I get to that destination. And if I stop at a red light, it's not like, oh my gosh, I have to turn back. I'm never going to make it. It's just part of the journey. There's going to be stops along the way. It's part of moving forward. And every decision you're making, you can say, is this moving me closer to where I want to be or not?
Yeah. I think that's huge. This idea of not needing to know how. That always reminds me for the last several months, anytime anyone talks about this concept, I always think of that scene in Lincoln where he says, "You got to get me those delegates, man. You've got 18 plenty good hours to get me those delegates before they vote on the 13th Amendment." And I don't even remember who it was. It was like his Secretary of State or something says, "How?" And then he says, "Buzzard's guts, man." So whenever anyone says, "Yeah, but how am I going to get this big goal?" I just want to say, "Buzzard's guts, man." Anyway, that's my stream of conscious tangent. But I do think that when you don't necessarily know how to do something, there's a lot of like potential frustration when we sit around. Ask yourself, if you do this, ask yourself what your big goals are and why they matter to you. And think about what those are. Have you found yourself thinking, why haven't these happened to me yet? Why haven't I experienced this big goal? Or why haven't I accomplished this big thing? Why haven't I written that first screenplay? Why haven't I directed that first movie? Why haven't I landed that role yet? And then ask yourself, what are the things that would need to happen before that? And I guarantee you will identify tons of things you haven't done yet. Tons of experiences you haven't had yet.
And if you are thinking that, then that shows there's a part of you that believes you should. That you should have already. You have this success expectancy that it should have happened sooner, that it should be happening quicker. And that's some version of it's not working.
Or that it should be easier.
But what if you really believed that it is working exactly the way you're doing it? It's working. It's happening at exactly the speed that it's supposed to be happening, in the way that it's supposed to be happening. Just that shift in belief is going to completely change the way you show up and move forward, and it's going to speed it up instead of slow it down. When you think it's not working, that really means you're not working.
Well, could you extrapolate on that a little bit? Because I think that that's a hard thing to swallow for a lot of people. I understand what you're saying because we've talked about this a lot. But try and paint the picture for why that mentality would believing that this is the way it should be happening or the speed that it should be happening, how does that help you?
I guess it's just this idea that what you believe is reflected in your results in your life. Like your results are a direct reflection of your beliefs. And so you can kind of see what people believe based on the results they have. And if you're thinking it's not working, then you're probably going to feel something like frustration or stuck and maybe impatience. And when you're feeling those emotions, that doesn't usually lead to working. It usually leads to trying to figure out what went wrong, trying to figure out what to do next. You do things that keep you stuck. But when you believe that it is working, then you're going to feel confidence, you're going to feel hope. And from those emotions, you're going to be found working forward and looking forward. And that creates forward momentum.
So it'll change what you do in some cases, and it'll also very often change how you do it, the way you show up, the way you approach answering certain questions or talking with certain people or arriving into certain events. I think that's really true.
And it's not like something that is a fact. It's not a fact. Whether it's working or not is a decision. You decide to believe that it's working or not. It's not like we can do a blood test and say, oh, yep, your film career is working or it's not.
I think you can read palms for that. There's something in my palm that reveals how successful of a filmmaker
some people
I am.
say that, but I, haven't tried it. So
I think it's real. So I think that's really powerful. And going back to this thought of like, you can accomplish more in the long term than you believe, and usually less in the short term than you believe. And, or that's often the case we find ourselves in. And I think the reason that's true is because accomplishing huge things in the long term is kind of about compounding effort. It's this idea of like, can you make millions of dollars by the time you are middle-aged? Most people don't. And most of us don't think we can make millions of dollars doing that, especially those of us who decide to go into normal jobs. But even people who go into normal jobs, when they put away just a few, like $100 or $200 a month when they're in their, late teens, early 20s, I mean, if they can get it to yield decent interest, they're going to be doing great. I mean, we've seen all those charts they shown to us in high school and stuff. Like, if you just put $100 away from the age, whatever, teen,
the sooner you start.
The sooner you start, the faster the compounding interest is going to start creating all this wealth by the time you're, even a little before that retirement age, in your 50s, and you're going to start really seeing like some great net worth, And I think most of us are always like, yeah, but wouldn't it be better to just do something that earns me $1 million? Wouldn't I rather just like get a big job, and earn tons of money? And it's like, it's this idea that Noam Kroll, check out his website and content.
Subscribe to his email.
Subscribe to his email list. He has a good email list. Email, weekly email.
His email.
Yeah. He talks about compounding effort. I really like that. As opposed to compounding interest. He talks about this idea that when you do something that's very small over and over again over the course of a long time, it's going to be way more powerful than doing something huge. So, for example, he said you could binge write a script for like 3 straight days and like pull all-nighters and just go like crazy caffeine and just dig in. And he said that would actually yield less total hours, and you'll be so exhausted that you'll definitely be writing slower than if you just did 2 hours a day for a normal work week for a month. And he said 2 hours a day, you still have time to like pay your bills and do other work and do all these other things. But he said, but by the end of the month, you will have put in, I think he said like 48 hours or something. I can't remember it. But he said, that's more than a full work week. And he's like, it's a full month. But he says, if you do that over the course of a year, you will have written either like a really great script or several, early drafts of other scripts, and apply that to whatever it is. Auditioning, acting, applying for things, honing a certain skill. And he talks about this and he says, over the course of years, what is that going to produce? And that's this whole idea of like, by small things are great things brought to pass, or they come into reality. And that's something that Mr. Rogers did. We brought him up. We're going to bring him up again. Fred Rogers made a television program that was 30 minutes long. And these were very simple programs. And yet he ended up winning like multiple daytime Emmys. He won a lifetime daytime Emmy award for television, for his television program. And this was a guy who made a very simple show with cheap sets, small crews. He sang songs himself. He wasn't an opera singer. And he just believed in it. He believed in this thing that he was doing, and he did an episode after episode after episode. And over the course of 40 years of doing the same song, where he took off a jacket and put it back on, and then took off his shoes and put some other shoes on, and then he talked to some children for 30 minutes and then walked out singing the same song for 40 years. And he changed lives. Like, millions of people were totally floored by this stuff. And he still has this legacy that's just living on. He's a cultural icon. And he didn't do it by like doing any huge things. It was just small things. And he even has a week dedicated to small things, or I guess big things, little things. So
what just came to mind for me was those statistics that tell you like, look at how many years of your life you spend sitting on the toilet or whatever.
Yeah, sitting at red lights.
Yeah, which can feel kind of depressing. But imagine it like if I just take 15 minutes a day, if I just take, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, like how those minutes add up, and it really does compound over time.
Yeah.
Well, we should probably wrap up. But
I just like remembering all the gross statistics about how much mucus I swallow every year. And I remember seeing ads for that in school. I watched strange TV in school, I guess.
So.
Anyway, a little bit every day goes a long way.
So when you look around and you see other people's success, this is an opportunity. You can either compare and despair, or admire and aspire and move forward.
Yeah. And I really believe that everyone listening to this can, by changing the way they view this and their mindsets and their attitudes, will find greater success than by fixating over things that they want to do or accomplish. So please let us know if you have questions about these concepts. If you're wanting to learn more, check out our website, Film and Family, invisiblemansion.com/film and family. And we hope to see you or hear you. We hope to be graced by your listening presence on the next episode of our podcast. Have a great evening.
All right. Talk to you then. Bye.
Bye.